Welcome to the Prof Talk Pod, brought to you by the Engaged Professor. Every 2 weeks, join us as we talk about tips and tricks to help you connect with your students, engage with industry, and stay up to date on all the teaching trends. We'll give you actionable strategies that will help improve your teaching today. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Prof Talk Pod. I'm excited to have Katie with me this week as we get ready to start the academic year very soon for both of us. And this week on the Prof Talk Pod, we are actually going to talk about a news item that I think about a week ago, there was an article across a lot of different news places, but I'll put the link to the NPR release in the show notes that was talking about the University of Michigan starting in fall of 2027 they're planning to just do pass fail grades for first semester freshmen, and they're piloting it. So it's just in one part of the school in the College of Literature. It's not every freshman student. And both Katie and I had seen this article kind of come across, and I've been seeing things online, people's reactions, and thought it might be an interesting thing for us to talk about. For a little bit of context, they are technically still assigning grades. They're just going to be background grades that they will have to use for reporting purposes and for transcripts, but students will actually see a pass fail. And according to the article, the university is doing this because they're seeing a pretty large increase in mental health issues. And so they're trying to reduce some of the stress or anxiety that students might be feeling that first semester of their freshman year when they're really attached to their grades. And also, they mentioned in the article, might encourage students to explore a little bit, take some courses that might be more difficult because they're not as stressed about the grade that they will earn and their overall GPA. So that's kind of the context if you haven't read the article yet. But Katie, I would actually love to hear kind of your first reaction as you read that, or maybe somebody brought it to your attention.
Yeah, when I read this, my husband actually brought it to my attention. Galen and I have talked about this quite a bit. So my initial kind of, I guess, knee-jerk reaction here is great idea. I have some questions. And one of the curiosities for me here is that, from my context, is that Michigan's a peer school to IU. We are all both in the Big Ten, and I think more specifically to me, we both have top 10 undergraduate business programs. So we are direct competitors and direct peers in that space. And so I think my initial thoughts were more selfish, I would say, in the context of sort of what does that mean for what people would expect out of our business program, and how I'm interested to see how they will accomplish this in an equitable way. And then, of course, have a lot of questions from there. So I don't know. Like, I think I'm not totally put off, but I definitely have some questions.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on it's a interesting concept. And as somebody who is going to pilot some ungrading in courses, some concepts from ungrading in courses in the spring, and have done a little parts of that already the last couple years, I understand and like the direction. And I was just talking to my husband about it as well. So it seems like we have a commonality there. He was kind of reactionary to the framing of this is about mental health. Why can't these young people just get tough, right? Kind of that get tough attitude. And I said, I remember about a year ago, I was teaching a class that had a first-time freshman in it. And he came up to me mid-semester and he said, Becky, I don't know what to do. I was a straight A student in high school. I took AP classes, I took college classes. And he's like, I am failing 3 classes and I'm not doing great in yours. And he's like, I don't know what to do. Like, I can't get motivated. I don't know how to manage my time. I just don't know. And he's like, I don't want to mess up my whole college career because this semester I definitely didn't have the skills I thought I had. And of course, for me, it was let me tell you all of the places at the university that can help you. There's so many resources, so many things. Let's talk about plan and your time management skills. But his level of stress was so high that have you ever had like a to-do list that's so long that you're just like, I'm gonna lay on the couch and do nothing because
You're
I
right.
can't do anything. And that's how he was explaining to me. He's like, I'm so overwhelmed, so worried, so frustrated. I just can't, I just don't do anything because I just can't. And I related to that because that happens to me. And so I've seen this happen. And I kind of get where that might help reduce for those first semester freshmen who haven't been away from home or haven't had to be their own manager. I can see it. I can see the usefulness of it.
Yeah, I can too. I kind of talked about questions about equity, and I read the Wall Street. There were lots of articles that came out. My source was the Wall Street Journal, and a couple things came to mind about that, and really reiterated with the example you just gave about your student. One of them is that first semester freshmen are not the only ones who experience mental health crises. So if you have a great freshman year, you're really motivated, you go in, things go well for you, and you don't need it at that time. I feel a little bit uncomfortable with this notion that it's only for this demographic of people in school. Because, what if a parent dies when you're a second semester junior, or, the pandemic? A lot of schools switched to pass fail during just really uncomfortable turning points, or, somebody has immigration issues. There are lots of times in a student's undergrad progression or career where this would be really useful. And I question a little bit the timing of it only being available to this one specific demographic who probably has disproportionate mental health challenges, but might not be a universal thing. The second thing, as I was reading more into the Wall Street Journal article, is this doesn't cover all first semester freshmen. It's only students in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts. So business students, for example, are not covered by this, even though we could argue that it's a very, very uncomfortably rigorous academic program. And so I'm uncomfortable with Michigan picking and choosing who they choose to cover in this idea. I think if they offered it to everybody and say, like, you get one semester where you can do pass fail. I needed that my first semester of senior year when my brother got diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, right? But I didn't necessarily need it my freshman year. Those are the discomforts with the equity piece I think I have in this, and I'm really curious to learn about if people speak up about that component, speaking just about Michigan, the way they decided to implement it.
Yeah, and they're not piloting it till next fall. So I would imagine that there has been some discussion already that they're thinking about some of those things because I did find it interesting that they were piloting it for one group of freshman students and assuming that they want to look at data, but it is going to be difficult for them to make any decision based off of one group of data anyway. And I think that's going to be a challenge just thinking about what it looks like for implementation and tend to agree with you that there might be an opportunity here to think about this as an option that is available when students might need it. And we should recognize that this is not a completely new concept.
Yeah.
If you look at the articles, Caltech has done something like this, MIT does things like this. There are universities that don't assign grades, period, throughout the whole course of students' academic time. So the concept itself isn't new. I think one of the things that people are really I guess connected to is what Katie said, which is this is a large public institution that serves a lot of students and that a lot of other institutions look to and consider a peer, and that we in higher ed are always thinking about what are our peers doing, what are the best practices, what's working, what can we do. And so that's maybe why you're seeing such a flurry of news around it as well, is that when MIT was doing it, MIT is not a peer institution for a lot of or a lot of higher ed institutions. So that was kind of their own thing, right? We pursued it as differently. So that's something to think about too. I'm curious, Katie, as somebody, as a teacher, this is what you do. If you could, if I, you tomorrow said, you know what, if you want to offer pass fail in a class, all of your classes, is that something that you think could be useful? How might you approach that? Would you want to do that at all? What do you think?
Yeah. So I think it's a very individual and nuanced decision. And that I don't think I should be the one to decide that. I think the burden should be on the student to decide whether they should take a pass fail semester. And that's because of, I think, future consequences of that decision. So a lot of people have brought up in these comments that med school decisions can be impacted by a semester of pass fail. Law school decisions, in my field, it would be the CPA exam eligibility.
Mhm.
And I don't know this, they might not be eligible to take CPA exam, require components for credit if they took an early level accounting class, pass fail. And so I'm not trying to deflect here, but I personally don't think I have the capacity to decide whether that decision is good for a student, and that it should be a very individualized decision for the student. Because I'm wondering here, if we have a student in Michigan, I'll take Michigan for example, who's in the college of the equivalent of college in arts and sciences, and they're getting a biology degree, and they take a really important foundational biology class first semester freshman year with the intent of applying to med school or doing pre-med later on. If they can opt out of that, if they can say, you know what, this isn't good for my situation. Conversely, we have a student, in the College of Engineering, which is really, really rigorous at Michigan, who says, I need that option. I really think this should be up to the individual student with advice from an academic advisor or even a mental health counselor to talk more about the longer term consequences of these decisions. And not to be a downer about this, but I think a lot of times we think, oh my gosh, my mental health is so bad, I need a break. For sure you do, but you might look back on that decision and go, actually, that was the wrong time to do that. Or I wasn't doing as badly as I thought. I took one pass fail class in college, and it was because I needed the credit hours to sit for the CPA exam. And I got an A in the class. And I was so mad because I was like, I could have just taken that class for a grade and my GPA would have been boosted. Instead, I'm in this pass fail situation, right? So that's kind of where I fall in that realm. Another thing I want to add to this conversation, because you talked about ungrading and specs grading, and there isn't a lot of research about pass fail grades right now, but there is research about specs grading and ungrading. And a lot of the research, not all of it, points to specs grading and ungrading works if students get continuity in it. So if you do specs grading, Becky, or ungrading in your class, and then your class is a prerequisite to my class, if I don't do specs grading or ungrading, the research shows that student is going to perform worse in my class than they would have if you didn't do specs grading. If I do specs grading after your class, the student will be great. So what are the consequences to longer term decisions, whether that's upper level classes in the same discipline, a lot of prereqs that first semester, freshman year, and what are the consequences to future career or degree moves, or even mental health later on?
Yeah, I think those are good points. And when we think about the long-term consequences, it's at least to anybody there, and I don't know anybody who works there, but it's my understanding that they are still putting grades somewhere, like
They call
faculty are
them
still
ghost
assigning
grades, I think.
grades.
Yeah,
Yes, that
Caltech
can be
does this too.
used. Yep, that can be used for those reasons, like trying to get into med school as an example. Now I struggle a little bit with that, feels like a middle ground to me, which I understand why, but like as a student, if I read that article, I know I'm still getting a grade then. So
Yeah.
even though just because I can't see it, does that completely remove the stress? I'm not sure that it does. Um, so I don't know. It feels weird to me for it to be kind of a both and in this situation.
Yeah, that's an
Um,
interesting point.
Yeah, I don't know. And again, I haven't been a undergraduate student in a many years, so I can't speak to how they're perceiving this, but I would be curious to know what their thoughts are on this decision and how they are thinking about, because it could cause some others additional stress to be thinking, yeah, no, I want to go to med school. I'm somebody I'm somebody who needs to see exactly how I'm doing. Like that's
Yeah.
my personality. So I would struggle with this because I wanna know if I got an A. I wanna know where I'm at. I don't wanna just know if I'm doing good enough because I don't know how to get better. And they're still gonna give give them feedback, right? Like, all those things are still gonna
Right,
happen.
right.
But there is probably the other side of it is there are people who aren't being served well, which goes back to your point, Katie, about choice as opposed to this is how we're doing it.
Yeah, and it also some of those early classes are indicators of success in the major. I took a finance class it was my sophomore end of my sophomore year that kind of this critical thing. I was going into school as an accounting and finance major. I took this finance class and was like, absolutely not. I'm not being a finance major. No way. Switched my double major to marketing. It's indicative of not just performance later on, but feelings about your intended major, right? And so I think that could go either way. I think it could give students false hopes that they did well in a class or because they passed. What was that scale? Or it could disproportionately dissuade a student who actually just needs to stick it out for a couple semesters, get some advanced or electives in, and find out they could be really amazing at this major. So I think I keep going back to why only first semester freshmen in their College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, right? That demographic. Becky, another thing I want to point out in this, because I think it's a very, very important part of this argument as other universities. So we've talked about like what we saw on Reddit, what we saw on LinkedIn. I read the comments on the Wall Street Journal article, and I personally have seen some very like polarized reactions to this. Faculty members, especially on LinkedIn, have been a little like the curious side, I think. But one of the things we need to keep in mind, especially for like, a lot of questions, is my institution going to do this? U.S. News and World Report undergraduate academic rankings. MIT, number 2. Caltech, number 11. Michigan, number 20, and number 3 among public schools. We are talking about a population of students who are naturally higher achievers. And frankly, with the exception of Michigan, a pretty small population of students. And so I would love to hear, I think, a little bit more about how this would translate to a mid-tier state school, right? Not a number 20 Michigan, who's number 3 among public schools, amazing reputation. Not number 1, waivers between number 1 and number 2 in the world, in the US, whatever it may be, MIT, not consistently top 10 Caltech, but number 78 Indiana University, right? Because I think we have a very different conversation if one of our schools implements this, right? Or the University of Miami, a private, small, expensive school implements this.
Or a regional university.
Or regional university or
I
community
mean,
college.
the student populations are wildly different, and I keep coming back to the point that you made about student choice and seeing how that does potentially help level the playing field if additional universities choose to do it, because then it is an opportunity, not a requirement, and it gets students a chance to think about their own individual situation and their own individual
Yes.
motivation. And I would say, I'm certain that all those institutions, any institution that has tried something similar, has done at an institutional level, does some research, collects some data.
Yeah.
But could we base our expected
Yes.
outcomes on MIT's? Certainly not, because the
Right.
student populations are not the same.
And I
And
think
that's an
that's
important point to remember.
yeah, I think that's where I was going with that. Is this first of all, Michigan will not disclose how they came to
Yeah.
this conclusion. They're not talking about it at all, which is kind of peculiar. Probably because they want to see how it goes and then be like, all right, we were wrong or we were right, and now here's the process. But I'm very curious as a peer institution how that would go. But yeah, I think this is kind of giving a little bit of a false sense of, oh, well, everybody's doing it, or oh, we could do it. But we're not looking at schools even in upper mid tier, right? We're not seeing Ivy League schools doing this. We're not seeing anybody in the, that mid echelon of public institutions or just national universities. We haven't heard much or anything about regional universities, like you mentioned. So the translatability of this is going to be really interesting, because I've heard a lot of, well, Caltech's doing it comments. Yeah, Caltech's doing it. They're like the #2 engineering school in the world, right? Of course they can, that statistic might not be exactly correct, but the point is they can accomplish it at a smaller scale. We're only talking about 8,000 freshmen here at Michigan, and that's bigger than the other two. So I don't know how excited I am to implement this at scale yet. Let's put it that way, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the articles I read actually talked about Harvard going the opposite way and actually increasing the rigor of grading. And again, not a peer institution, not like every institution in the
Yeah, I
country
feel
for
this
sure.
too.
What's interesting about that, and this is a conversation for a different time about criterion versus norm referenced grading, but Harvard was talking about moving back to norm referenced grading, and you only get, I think I read, and I can't remember exactly, I think 20% of your class can have an A,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is a completely different, that's the opposite end of pass fail,
Yeah.
right? That's putting more emphasis on it. So I
The
think
law school
everybody
at IU is doing that, actually.
is doing that.
Sorry to interrupt you, but the law school here at IU Bloomington is we call, bell curve norm reference grading, for the same reason, because of, well, in the Michigan, the article talked about grade inflation or grade deflation, and I don't know if that's how we solve it, right?
Yeah, I was just gonna say grade inflation is on that norm criterion referenced. I think we need to do another episode on, because we need to dive in and define and look at the history of some of those things to get too deep into that. And we only have like 8 minutes left of this one. But all of this is related to the way Michigan presented it. Was it's about mental health and also grade inflation. What Harvard is doing was presented as about grade inflation and has an interesting mental health connection to it. What I found interesting, before we get ready to wrap up, when I did see this on LinkedIn posted by people who do not work in higher ed, people who are not faculty members, I was a little bit taken back by some of the comments and criticisms of those who don't exist in the system. Kind of that same attitude that my husband had. I had somebody say, "Oh, it's already so easy to get an A, and now we're worried about their feelings, so we're not even going to make them have to deal with it." And, "Oh, this generation is so soft." And, for them. And I don't know, we've worked so hard to fight against mental health stigma. And so that attitude of like, maybe there were actually, I had a lot of friends in college who probably had needed help, but didn't get it because we didn't talk about it. So now, of course, we're seeing more students struggle with mental health because they're willing to tell us. And I don't know that I want to say that's a bad thing, and we shouldn't try to help them through that because they're willing to tell us. And that's where I found that interesting, that the comments
Yeah.
on that were so like negative to like, oh, these poor children who can't get it together. And also, you're 50 or 60 years old and you don't remember what it was like to be a freshman in
Well,
college.
in the survivor's bias, right? This is how anything goes when policy changes, is we have survivor's bias. I survived. I did it. You can suck it up and get it done. And I talk to, on the other side of this, to friends and colleagues and recruiters at the business school all the time, where I couldn't get into IU, or at least not to the business school right now. Like the way I was as a freshman, I wouldn't be eligible to get in, even though I was a direct admit top of my class, a million years ago. The expectations are pretty different now than they were. We also had a pandemic 6 years ago that changed a lot of the mentality, a lot of the mental health, not just dialogue, but decision making. And we're in a position right now, and I think this is kind of to your point about being taken aback at some of the comments. Higher education is not being discussed favorably right now, at the national level, at least, right? And so I feel like this a little bit was a little fuel to the fire of that, which made people are really brave online in the comments. And I think that's one of the reasons people have, the Wall Street Journal article comments were like brutal. I mean, absolutely brutal. We feel brave when we are attacking a popular subject to attack.
Yeah, I tend to agree is that the timing of it probably isn't great for higher ed because there is a lot of negativity out there. And, I don't know that usually on the Prof Talk Pod, we have some standard takeaways for those listeners. I'm not sure we have any this time, other than if you hadn't read about this, if you hadn't thought about it, wanted to have a chance to discuss what we were hearing, what we were thinking, what it means for us as we look at the bigger picture. And also, honestly, I don't know that it's a sky is falling moment. And yet, so much of the news makes it feel like that. And so, if you are feeling like, okay, well, this is a thing they're trying, and I get why they're trying it, you're not alone in feeling that way. You're not alone in questioning it and thinking about it and having ideas about it. And don't feel like this is a moment where you have to choose which side you're on, because there are so many iterations of how this could be implemented. But I
Yeah.
do think it's a moment for listeners to think about what are your thoughts on the role grades
Yes.
play in the student experience, and how do you approach the presentation of grading in your class? And remember the wide variety of perspectives and experiences coming into your classrooms and how that might affect the student experience. I don't know, Katie, do you have any thoughts
Yeah,
that might be
I
helpful?
think that this is going to be a conversation that's going to come up a lot at all levels of many, many, many universities and colleges. And I hope we've given the audience some food for thought about things to consider if it does come up. Could we do this? Could we implement this? Why did they do it? What were the nuances? And I think that that's what I would say is just I have questions, and that's okay. The cautious optimism for me, I'm just so curious, so curious about how this goes, because IU, Indiana University Business School, is going to be watching this closely as a peer institution, and I don't know. I kind of hope it doesn't go super well. I'll be honest, Becky.
Yeah,
I hope they run into some snags so we can talk more.
yeah, so I think it's very interesting, and we'll be watching the news on it and seeing if other institutions, because I agree, Katie, I think places are going to be like, well, if Michigan's doing it, maybe we need to do it. And how do we do it? And what does it look like for us if they're not already having those conversations? And so be ready for those in your faculty meetings, and don't hesitate if you have thoughts or comments. We would love to see them. You can put them directly at the bottom of the YouTube video. You can send them to us via email. If you are somebody who teaches part-time or as an adjunct, and this hadn't even crossed your mind as a way to go about grading, I'd love to hear your thoughts too, living in both a professional space and the higher ed space. And we are really grateful that you tuned in to listen to us talk a little bit about this article. Please check out the show notes. We'll put a couple different places where you can read about it, because there's been articles that have taken different perspectives, so you can think about it a little bit more for you. If you found the discussion interesting or useful, please share this podcast with somebody that could also benefit from it. We really appreciate you listening and look forward to seeing you next time.